Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of Breakthroughs with Bre. My name's Bre. I am a soul alignment, shadow work, and healing coach. I am a channeler. I'm an energy healer. I'm an astrologer. I'm a tarot reader. And I am the host of this podcast, Breakthroughs with Bre, where we're having breakthroughs about our personal and spiritual development, all in pursuit of living our most authentic, joyful, and blissful lives. On today's episode, I'm so excited for you to hear this one. I have a wonderful conversation with someone who specializes in using astrology, human design, and other modalities and finding fulfillment in their career. So, we're going to be talking about all things human design. We're going to be talking a little bit about astrology, and really, we're doing this all through the lens of what is your own unique potential? What is your own unique signature? How does that show up in spaces? And how do you respond to other people's signature? And how can you use that information to really be in alignment with your own authenticity, with your own uniqueness in a way that makes you feel more fulfilled? And we look at this a lot, talking about the different centers in his human design chart. So I recommend if you really want to follow along and look at your own chart at the different centers, we describe it throughout the episode. There's going to be a link in the bio where you can pull up your own human design chart if you have your date and time of birth. I highly recommend that you have that up as you're listening. You don't have to. You're still going to get so much of this episode if you don't. But if you have that up, then it's going to make it super easy to understand what this might mean for you and your chart. Other quick announcement before we get into the episode, my program Valuable and Abundant is getting postponed until next year. So if you were interested in it, but the timing wasn't right, this is great news because it means that the timing might be right later next year. You're still going to be hearing me talk a lot about the information I've channeled through because it's freaking spectacular. But I wanted to give everybody that update in case you go to my site and you don't see the information for that there. And my other announcement is I'm going to be opening up a lot more slots for single sessions. So if you just want to book a single session with me in one of my modalities, I'm going to start having more availability on my website for you to be able to book with me. I'm going to have my Akashic Records channeling. I'm going to open up back up my astrology sessions if you want to have me talk with you about some of the basics of your chart and what that means for you. I'm going to be opening up tarot readings. You're definitely going to hear a lot more about that. And I think I'm also going to be opening up single coaching sessions, which again, you'll hear more about. So all of that to say, keep posted on my Instagram. I'm going to announce things there. Keep an eye on my website. And if you're not subscribed to my email list already, not only do I send little channeled messages at the beginning of every week for you to contemplate my little gift to you, but I also send updates about when new services come online or availability opens up so that you are the first to hear about it and sometimes getting exclusive discounts. So, with all of that being said, please enjoy this episode. All right, everybody, on today's episode, we are so lucky to have a career fulfillment coach who uses astrology, human design, and other personal development tools to help guide professionals to find work that fills them up. We have Marla Tseng on the podcast today, and I'm so excited to welcome her. Hi, Marla.
Hi, Bree. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
I'm so excited. So Marla and I did a sort of like brainstorming call a few weeks ago, and we were talking about like what this episode might look like and what kind of information. And I was so excited just based off of like the brainstorming, like just the ideas of what might come through that I've been genuinely looking forward to recording this and for you guys to hear it for a very long time. So Marla, how are you feeling today? How are you feeling about coming on and telling us a little bit about finding career fulfillment with a tool like human design?
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here because I have been using this with some of my clients, and I just think that there's so much potential for people to be able to use this in their own lives, and especially with regard to career, which is something that I'm very interested in. And so I'm really glad to be here to be able to share some more valuable information for you and the listeners.
I love it. I love it. I'm sure that we're all going to get a lot out of it. Before we go into your story, because I'm very excited to like talk about that for a minute and hear that from you, I would love to hear just a little bit about you in terms of the questions that I love to ask all of my guests. all of the personal development, like fun little tools and types that we have. So if you'd like to start by telling us, like, tell us, a little bit about you. It might be your pronouns, where you're from, your astrology, your human design. Like, give us like the rundown who Marla is.
Yes. Okay. Well, pronoun she, her. And I grew up in San Antonio, Texas. My family is Chinese Peruvian, so it's quite an interesting mix. Um,
Love.
I my did you want me to go into the astrology, yeah, my
Yeah.
sorry, my astrology is Libra sun, Aries moon, Aries rising, and I'm in ISFJ. I had to actually look that up. I hadn't done the Myers-Briggs in a while. So and then the Enneagram 7, and I'm not sure about my aura colors. I haven't done that, so I'm fascinated by that. And then Hogwarts house, I love Ravenclaw. That's the one that speaks to me. So
I love it. And then for the big kahuna, tell us your human design. What are you?
yes, I am a 1-3 emotional generator. So
Nice. I
yeah.
love it. And with your astrology, with that double Aries Libra, how are you feeling in this eclipse? For anybody who doesn't know, this might get released a little bit afterwards because we're recording like right on the Libra um new new moon eclipse with Aries. That's like right on all of your personal astrology. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I've been eyeing this eclipse for a while because it was actually on my birthday.
Oh,
So
wow.
at the exact
Happy
degree
belated birthday.
yeah, I was at the exact degree of my son.
Wow.
So it was overall it was a really good birthday. I mean, I've already made big changes in my life since going back to August. And so I think this is just, a further validation of the big changes that are going on for me right now.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. And I think that's a perfect tea. I would love for you to tell the listeners a little bit about your background and your story coming into the kind of work that you're doing now.
Yeah, well, I was a lawyer for 14 years and, so big law, and I worked at two Fortune 500 companies. So it was very much being in the corporate world. But I always loved astrology. I discovered it when I was in middle school, and it was sort of always in the background. And I began studying it more seriously in 2019 and began giving readings. And I felt really lit up by it, which is funny because now that I know that I'm a generator, I realize it makes a lot of sense why I kept being so drawn to it, because it just really made me feel so happy when I was doing it.
Mm.
And so um, then I ended up finding out about human design and thought, wow, this is really fascinating as well. It gives you more information about yourself. And I found a lot of it to be very practical and tangible. And so I decided to start studying that as well. And this year I made the decision to leave my corporate job and to begin my coaching business, Many Worlds, Many Possibilities, LLC, to help professionals, who are, especially those who are feeling stuck or unhappy in their jobs, to help them find career fulfillment by using these tools like astrology and human design.
Mhm.
Because I think that having an awareness of your gifts and then understanding what really drives you is so important and can give you that validation and the courage to make big changes in your life.
100%. I can already think of all of the people who are listening or who have like been past clients of mine that like they have these kinds of questions. They're like, Am I in the right kind of career? Am I on the right path? Like, what is the right path? I don't even know where to start." And I think it's just so brilliant that you had this inspiration to use these tools like astrology and human design that just have so much information, like they have so much really cool like juiciness in them for many different parts of our lives, and of course they would about career. So I think it just like it makes perfect sense that you would like specifically like look at those tools through the lens of like how that can that be applied to something like my career, to be able to like help me find my own sort of like inner compass about where and what I want to be doing.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I really love it. I mean, it's fascinating, and I'm working with some clients now, and I'm really excited to be able to share new information with them. They're not as familiar with their astrology or human design, so it's really fun to bring that. And then also, obviously, to see, does this resonate with them, because they're ultimately the people who know themselves the best. And
Yeah.
One of the things I like about human design is it's meant to be an experiment. We're meant
Mhm.
to play with it and see how much of it really resonates with us. Does it make sense to do things the way that human design tells us? Yes or no. And so it's I appreciate that aspect of human design.
I love it. Well, here's one thing I wanted to ask you since you've been studying astrology, but I mean, really, you've been studying astrology since you first started using it in middle school, right? Even though that looked a little different starting in 2019. I have not yet done a podcast just on astrology, which might be kind of surprising to people because I started like one of my first services I started with was astrology. Um, but I have done these podcasts on human design, which is like something that's a little bit newer for me. So I'm curious, like, how I don't know, like how do you feel about astrology versus human design? Like what do you feel like are like the strengths of one versus the other, like the energy of one versus the other, like being somebody who really actively works with both? Like I'm really curious like what your thoughts are about that.
Well, astrology is my first love. So it is. I have to say, I mean, I truly, truly love it. I feel very passionate about it, and I'm always wanting to learn more about it.
Hmm.
And and at the same time, I find that there's so many different systems of astrology, like some that I
Yeah.
hear of and I think, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about that. And and to me, they're all valid because
Hmm.
that's the beauty of astrology, right?
Hmm.
And so it's so vast in that sense. And not to say that human design isn't, but I find now that I've been studying human design, there are, of course, different views, but for the most part, there are certain things that are more um, sort of usually the same across the different
Consistent.
systems. And so sometimes, so in my own coaching, I'm starting with human design and then I'll bring in the astrology. But the other thing about astrology, which is great, is of course the timing, the transits, which are also,
Yeah.
you also have that in human design, but in astrology, it's sort of easier with the different houses. You can see really where something is impacting that particular area of life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I find that they're very compatible, very complementary. Um, and but yes, that's one of the things that I like about human design is because I have a very, very logical mind, and there's a certain step-by-step process in the beginning of human design that I really enjoy and I think can people can get a lot out of. But the
Mm.
astrology can bring in so many other things as well, because in astrology, you can see somebody's entire life, not just them, but everybody else in it. Like it's really amazing,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So that's something that I appreciate about the astrology as well.
Yeah, I feel very similarly as I'm thinking about this now. I feel like astrology almost has this very like vast and mysterious like energy in itself. Like it's so complex. I feel like it has its own innate like magic to it, you know? Um, and it's just this like hulk of a beast of a like concepts and energy for us to work with. And I think that that's beautiful because there's always going to be something for us to discover and see in astrology. But I will say that it also, especially when I first started learning about it, it's a little intimidating, and there's a lot to learn to even like really first start working with it, you know? So I feel like sort of those like that barrier to entry might feel a little bit higher with astrology because it is such a robust system. And I feel like at least the way that I use astrology and interpret it is I really love the symbol and metaphor and archetype element because it does give you enough structure to where you have a little bit of specificity, but it leaves a lot of room for interpretation and intuition, which leaves it like always free flowing, you know, which also makes it like ever changing. Like you're never gonna just know, and that's the right answer with astrology, you know, which makes it wonderful and also like kind of a challenging thing to work with. Whereas, and what I've learned about human design so far, which is admittedly not a ton, but a little bit, is I feel like it's a system that is a little bit more like it has a little bit more of a boundary around it. It's not quite as like huge and free flowing and like all that kind of stuff that like astrology is. And I feel like its system is a little bit more digestible and it's a little bit more accessible. Like it has a little bit lower barrier of entry, right? Like it's still a very complex system and all these different parts you can learn about. So there's still like depth you can go into it, but just like on an initial like person off the street let me explain to you this concept so that you can actually start benefiting from its information. I feel like human design, again, is just like a little bit more, like a little bit more consumable in that way. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes, it makes perfect sense because I do feel that certain elements of human design, the type, strategy, authority, even and then maybe profile, if you just stop there, if that's all you learned about yourself, that would take you very far. You don't
Yeah.
even have to get into, of course, it's always fun to get into the weeds, but
Yeah.
you could stop there. And whereas with astrology, I wonder, I mean, I'm like, is it really enough to know your sun, moon, and rising? I mean, for myself, for example, if that's all you saw, you wouldn't see that I have a whole stellium in Scorpio, like that you would miss that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in that sense, I do feel like, I guess, the more elemental parts of human design, that you can maybe do more with them without having to get into all of the details, whereas with astrology, I think you do need more of the nuance,
Yeah.
more of the complexity.
100%. Yeah, which is why I feel like it's even for me, like not doing a podcast on it yet. I'm like, how do I like, like how do I like take on something that's just so vast and beautiful and mysterious and specific and all that kind of stuff, like in like an hour podcast. Like I don't, like I haven't been struck with the inspiration for exactly how to approach that yet. But like again, I've felt these ways of doing that with human design, which feel really cool. What I will say that I love about all of these things across the board and things even that extend beyond astrology and human design is I just feel like like it cannot be stated enough how much value there is in giving language to parts of yourself for you to understand, work with, observe, rework, question, emphasize. Like they're I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to start to understand with language, with concept, right? And being able to name these parts of yourself, almost like personify them a little bit so that you can like look at them and turn them around and like analyze or like you can do that process with yourself. Like I think that's one of the best gifts that you can give yourself. And it doesn't really matter what system you use. Whatever system you feel curious about, whatever system you feel drawn towards is probably the one that's going to have the most juiciness for you. But that's what I love across the board with both human design and astrology. Like being able to name that very emotional, instinctual, intuitive part of myself that's my moon and understand that it's in Pisces and that it's in my 11th house, kind of near my midheaven, and that it's opposing my sun and Mercury. Like being able to have language for like that dynamic in myself and those parts of that self, like that's so helpful to me in understanding myself, right? And even from what I've learned about human design, like being a manifesting generator and what that means, and like how things will happen in my life. And I'm like, that's very 4/6 of me. Like that's a very 4/6 profile that would be my experience right now. Like there's just so much opportunity that comes when you offer yourself the same thing with the aura colors, like when you offer yourself these ways to actually like articulate and identify and work with the complexity of who you are?
Yes, I absolutely agree. Naming it, becoming conscious of it, aware, like that's for me, for example, being a 1-3. So the first number is the one that we're usually more conscious of, and then the second number is the part that is we might be less conscious, but other people can see it in us.
Mm,
So the one is all about wanting to have the investigating and researching and becoming the expert in something, which I very much recognize in myself. And there can be
mhm.
that kind of insecurity of, oh, I don't know enough, I don't know everything, I didn't read every book. But once I hit that, I'm like, oh yeah, that is totally the way that I am. And then the
Yeah.
three is a part that, honestly, if I hadn't seen it in human design, I wouldn't really have picked up on it. But it's the experimentation. It's taking the theory, the abstract, and then playing with it, testing it, seeing what works, what doesn't work. So that was a part of myself that when I look back on my life, I realized that is what was happening, but I never saw it in that way. And it gives me that validation of like, okay, well, that's the way that's also a part of myself. That's my way of another way of being in the world. And
Mhm.
it actually was very comforting to me
Yeah,
to look back and to see, okay, yes, that's the way that I am designed.
totally. Yeah, I one of my favorite people I follow on Instagram and who I've also done an astrology reading with the Sagittarian mind. That's his handle, Jason.
Oh,
And
I
he
love
did it.
him.
I
Yeah.
love him. I did a reading with him too. He's fantastic. Um, one of his posts said that looking and using a tool like astrology can help you acknowledge and express all parts of yourself.
That's beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful. If any of these tools that you use help you acknowledge all the parts of yourself and express them appropriately, accordingly, magic. Absolute magic.
Yes, I totally agree. It's and the beautiful thing is there's always something new to learn. It doesn't really you can look at your chart for years and years and still see new things and find new things. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, well, I feel like we should transition into the good stuff where we can get into the specifics of human design as it applies to navigating career and career fulfillment, because I'm sure after listening to all of this, the listeners are very excited to hear more. All right, everyone, let's get into what I'm sure you guys are all dying to hear more about. To start off, Marla, will you tell us, just like big picture, what does it look like to connect a tool like human design to a specific part of your life, like career, and trying to navigate it and find fulfillment and all that kind of stuff? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, well, you know, the great thing about human design is that it really shows you how you can the best way for you to make decisions for yourself. So that's across the board. It's not just in career, it's in all areas of your life. So that's why understanding just the elemental parts of your human design can help you so much in your both your day-to-day decisions, at work, but also your big decisions. Am I going to stay in this job? Am I going to change careers? Am I going to move to another location for my job? All these things. Human design can actually really help us with that. And
Mhm,
so I would say if we look at the five energy types, there
mhm,
is a division which is very helpful, like at a high level. So, and we'll go into the centers, the energy centers, but there's one in particular which is the sacral center, and it's the center for life force, workforce energy. And about 70% of the population has that defined or colored in when you look at the chart.
mhm,
And those are the generators and the manifesting generators. And that means that they have consistent access to that life force, workforce energy, which helps with, of course, with career, with work, with family. It's sexual energy as well. It's all of those things.
mhm,
When you have consistent access to that, then you can go, go, go. Now, we're meant, generators and manifesting generators are still meant to be lit up by what they're doing. And so that's very important in career. I mean, because really they're the ones who are doing so much of the work that it should be something that they enjoy. Otherwise, they will burn out. Even though it's a motor and gives all that energy, if they're not using it correctly, they can still burn out. So that's one
mhm.
thing that's very helpful to understand. So if you are, if you think about what you're currently doing and you think, I just really am unhappy all the time. I am just like not feeling this. I'm having to push myself through this. You're really burning out your sacral center if you're a generator or manifesting generator. So that's just one thing that's very helpful to know. The other types, so the manifestors, the projectors, the reflectors, do not have the sacral center colored in or defined, which means that when they can borrow that energy from generators or manifesting generators in the workplace, for example, and like amplify it and be able to have all this energy in a short amount of time, which makes them seem superhuman. But it's borrowed energy, it's not sustainable. And so, for example, the manifestors are here to really be initiating, starting things, but they're not meant to be continue to do the thing. Like they're not
Mhm,
meant to be in the weeds of something,
mhm.
right? So that's very helpful. I mean, if you're a manifestor and you're in the weeds, you're going to be like, this isn't the right use of my energy, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to feel frustrating because you want to get started on something else and you're stuck trying to implement this thing, that was started before. If you're a projector, projectors are meant to be wise guides. They have this bird's eye view of the situation, but they can also look very deeply into people and really understand people. And so they're really meant to be guiding others, directing them, managing them, and also not so much being in the weeds, right? That's
Mhm.
going to tire them out as well. It's not the right use of their energy.
Yeah.
And the reflectors are the rarest type, and they don't have any energy centers colored in. So they're experiencing all this energy from different people. And they're really meant to be here reflecting like the well-being of their community. It's very interesting. Like they're so if they're doing well, that's great for the community. If they're not, it's like we should look into that. But also they're not able to, they're not meant to be doing all the time. So in a practical sense, manifestors, projectors, reflectors, it might help them to know this, because they might feel in our society we've really been conditioned to be all about our productivity and the 9 to 5, right? And they're not designed to work in the traditional way. And so it can be very validating to people when they hear that. We're like, oh my gosh, this is why it just never felt right,
Mm-hmm.
this way of working.
Yeah.
And it might help them if they can come up with other sources of income, for example, because there are going to be times when they're not being able to do all the doing, basically, right?
Yeah.
Or to come up with a kind of career where they're doing more of, let's say, like the consulting, like being like a projector could be a great consultant. That would be a really good fit for them,
Mhm.
And so just knowing those things without knowing more is, I think, very helpful for people.
Okay. So like those are some examples of how understanding like what like really fills your bucket, you know, like what puts back into your bucket while you're doing it versus an activity that simply takes from the bucket and doesn't replenish it. How like starting to put some words and phrases and understanding to that can be really practical from a career standpoint. Because I'm even thinking about when I was in the corporate worlds and I went straight into corporate America right out of college, even though I'd worked from like the age I was 16. So I've like always been like working, working, working. So I relate to this whole like your productivity is, blah, blah, blah. So true. I could do a whole podcast just on like us deconstructing that paradigm, but I will get off my pedestal about that to talk about this concept. Um, but yeah, I can see how, like, even through my career, like having known something like this would have helped me, like, identify what kind of roles, even within a company, I might want to gravitate towards, you know? Like, is there a certain project type I would want to work on, or is there an opportunity for me to kind of shift into this kind of role versus this kind of role, right? Or is there a way that I can like restructure or reframe how I'm interacting with certain tasks that I have that tap into those sort of like bucket filling activities, so that it could all feel a little bit more sustainable. I could totally see how that would be very practical.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
What other parts do you work with people on in their chart? Like, what are some more examples of places that people can look in their human design, that might start to help them put some pieces together?
Yeah. So after the 5 types, the next would be the strategy, which goes with the type, right? But I do think it is helpful. So for example, going back to the generators and the manifesting generators, because again, in our society, we've been conditioned to just do it. Like just do it. Go after what you want, right?
Yeah.
And the generators, manifesting generators, are actually meant to respond to things to signs, right? To things in their external environment, not just like no sign is meant to be making decisions from their head, actually.
Hmm.
Um, and so the generators and manifesting generators, if you knew, okay, I'm not really meant to have the whole picture. I just know that I need to respond to the next thing that really like lights me up, that draws me in, that there's a pull, because that's the sacral center, like pulling you towards something. And the sacral center it's either a yes or a no, basically, right? And that also takes some deconditioning, because sometimes we can experience that, but then our mind comes in, is like, no, but actually I should do this because XYZ, even though our body is telling us no. Right? Or
Yeah,
maybe
this was
it's telling us yes, but our mind is like, I don't really I think that's a good idea right now. So we like can rationalize things, and we're not listening to what our body is telling us.
100% that learning this was a big thing for me. Like realizing, like somebody had explained it very similar to how you just did. Like your body, your sacral will tell you yes or no. And they were describing it in terms of shopping. Like I like looking at like a certain item of clothing or something. And like my body, like my sacral just says, mm-mm, nope, don't like it, not into it. no explanation. There's like no reasoning really behind it. It's just like an immediate, like, yeah, no, versus like oh my God, I love that. Like, yes, and like starting to differentiate that kind of response from your body. I will say that does require you to be in touch with your body's signals. And if, like many of us have been at one point, you're at a place where you are still kind of running on the stress response, like you're still running in fight or flight, and you're doing everything you can to numb or distract from your body, then it can be a little bit difficult at first to try and tune in to your body's instinctual sort of response to things, nervous system regulation work, creating more space and peace in your life, coming back into contact with your body sensations, even about like when it's hungry or thirsty or you need to sit or use a restroom, all important things to start building that connection again, a lot of somatic work. But when you are in touch with that, it can be a game changer. Like even now as a business owner, like I would think about maybe if I wanted to do a course or work with a coach or something, like my body tells me right away. Like if it's not a full yes, then it's a no, you know? And like learning to trust that. And the times when I thought, my mind says, oh, but maybe, and I've tried to go with it, it did not turn out well. And letting that be proof that like that instinct in my body, in my sacral, was telling me everything I needed to know. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Um, and it's interesting because certain types, well, so generators and manifesting generators can either, as far as if we get to talking about authority, which is the decision making, it's either your sacral center is defined and that's your authority. So it is that in the moment kind of decision, or there's another center called the emotional solar plexus, which then that overrides that. And so you kind of need some clarity, you need time, like to sleep on it, to really figure out, okay, I was really excited at this point in time, am I still excited by the end of the week about this, right? And it can really help because that's my authority. I'm an emotional generator, and so I always felt very, if you look at my astrology, I have a lot of Aries, right? So that impulsiveness, and I would go into things impulsively. And then when I learned about this, I'm like, oh, well, let me play with this. Let me experiment. Does it make sense for me to wait and then see how my emotional wave, because that's what happens, there's an emotional wave that occurs. Do I still feel the same way, a few days later about a decision, like investing in a course, for example?
Oh
And
my
so,
goodness.
yes, yeah, knowing those sorts of things are helpful as well when you're making decisions, because some people are meant to make spontaneous decisions and some people are meant to wait it out.
Okay, so this is fascinating because I am like I have my sacral center defined, which I believe is just a thing for manifesting generators in general, right? But I am an emotional authority. So I also have, which I think is that a manifesting generator thing that both of them are defined? Is that like what the
No,
criteria
it
is?
doesn't
Or
necessarily have to be that way, but it can be, but not
okay.
all. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm an emotional authority, and I kind of like found that interesting. Like, what does that really mean? I really meant like resonated with that sacral thing because I have had times where like immediately yes or no. But I will caveat, and you explaining that makes perfect sense. Like with the emotional authority, like I do tend to, even though I will have an instinctual reaction, I will sit with it, and it's almost like letting like the dust settle in the water. Like the water's shaken up and I have an idea, but like I gotta let the dust settle to like see through the water clearly. And then I'm like, okay, I know. I'm fully on board, with like whatever that feeling was. And like I'd never heard the emotional authority be described like that.
Yeah, and 50% of the population has emotional authority. So
Oh, wow.
there are a lot of us who need to be like sort of waiting out for the
Everyone, listen up.
yes, I know. Yes, that was a revelation for me as well. Because I
Wow.
do have strong yes, no instincts as well. And so I would just go based on that. And so now I've been more deliberate, more intentional. And because if if you're not sure about a decision and you don't wait out the emotional wave, if you have emotional authority, then what can happen is even if you decide to go forward with it, that variability, that indecisiveness is going to carry through that experience.
Mm. So your level of like certainty and clarity that you can bring into the decision, even if it's the same decision, is different based on if you're waiting till the end of the emotional wave versus if you're jumping in mid-wave.
Yeah, because midwave, you haven't yet gotten to that point of clarity. And so
Hmm.
then if you overwrite that and just decide, I'm going to do it anyway, then it's kind of like you never reach that point of clarity, and there
You
can
never
be
get that level of
stability, that
conviction that you get
uncertainty,
to bring into it.
that like back and forthness,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, but having said that, I mean, it's kind of the toughest authority to have because everybody's emotional wave is different.
Mhm.
And it's in all of this, only you can really know how your own authority works for you. So that's why there's a lot of experimentation with it.
That's so fascinating. 50% of
It's a lot.
people with an emotional authority. Wow. And gosh, that makes me feel like too, like one of my favorite points on an astrology chart to look at is the moon sign, which I always joke around like my favorite placements in a chart to look at are the placements that are most prominent in my chart. Like I'm a moon ruled chart as a Cancer rising. I
Yeah.
love looking at Chiron and I love looking at Mercury, which both rule Virgo, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yes.
And like and just my Pisces moon itself is also like a very like, moony, intuition-y kind of thing. So the moon, very long way to say, is one of my favorite places to look at a chart. And I always think it's so valuable to be looking at how can I be more in touch with my emotional self? How can I increase my emotional intelligence? How can I find my tools that work for me in terms of emotional regulation or emotional processing? Like that learning language for that, learning tools for that, like learning what that means specifically for you has always been one of the most interesting things that I like to look at in a chart, both for myself and when I'm reading for other people. And that it seems like that's even more important, knowing that there's so much of the population who are relying on that type of experience
Right.
to come to clarity and find their conviction in making decisions.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Being in touch with the emotions and um understanding, some people say it's really helpful actually to keep maybe a journal of your emotional wave, each day to see how you're feeling and what's impacting how you feel, right?
Yeah.
Because then you can probably see patterns.
Well, that's crazy. That is such a synchronicity that you just said that, Marla. Because with my manifestation coach I'm working with, she just had me start doing the morning pages, which
Yeah.
is like a big trend from this book called The Artist Way, where it's like basically first thing you wake up in the morning, before you do anything else, you're journaling like 3 to 4 pages, like just stream of consciousness, whatever comes up, right? So I've been doing this for a couple weeks and I love it. And in my session that I had with her just before we started recording, she's like, I want you to look back at your prompts. You don't read them right afterwards, you just leave them, right? I haven't looked back at any of them. And she's like, I want you to read them and see if you find any trends of like feelings or things that trigger something for you, or even trends in certain words that you use. So the fact that you just said, keep a journal, notice trends, and I literally, whoa, that I was just talking with somebody about that. Wow, that's crazy to me. Whoa.
Yes. So that can be something helpful for people, well, for anyone, I think, but especially for those of us who do rely on the sort of emotional compass for decisions in human design. Yes,
Wow,
understanding
that's
our pain. Because
fascinating.
it's supposed to be different for different, also getting into more details. Yeah, the wave is not the same for everybody, basically. So
Okay. Okay, cool. So we have our sacral authorities, so that's defined in the chart. And by the way, if you've never looked at a human design chart, I would, that this will probably be confusing to you if you haven't. There's like different shapes that are in the chart, and you can tell the ones that are colored in versus not because they're literally empty or they have like numbers and some sort of shading in the different centers. So that's what we're talking about. So sacral center defined, instant yes, no, very like instinctual, sort of like from the gut, from the body kind of energy, emotional authority. You're going to feel some feels, but ride the wave, wait for clarity. What are some of the other like authority types?
yeah, there's some of the other types can have, for example, the splenic authority or the spleen, which is the center for intuition and time and well-being and health, our immune system. And that's sort of like the sacral center in that it's very in the moment. It's this I don't have that, but from what I've heard, it's like a whisper. And our intuition is generally quiet, right? It's
Yeah.
something you have to be tuned into. So a lot of times the spleen will speak once and then not speak again, apparently. And so people if that's their authority, then they really have to be very tuned into their body, like you were saying.
Mm.
And they are meant to make spontaneous decisions. And there's nothing rational about it either, similar to the sacral authority. So
Wow. What's interesting is I do have the spleen center defined. So like a little bit of that experience I could relate to. And I feel like I don't know if this is helpful to anybody listening to it. I'm feeling like sharing it. I feel like with a solar plexus, it's like, again, it's more of like a body instinctual, like gut reaction. It's like my preference for something being shown to me through like an urge to go towards or away or whatever you want to call that, right? The emotional thing makes sense to me too, because I might have like a feeling about it, but like I don't know how I feel other than the fact that there's feelings around it, right? And it takes a minute for me to kind of like pull it apart and see what's really going on. The spleen thing and how you've described it, for anybody who like listens to Mystic Michaela, she talks about getting downloads, like getting like just like all of a sudden a download. I really relate to that. And I feel like that might be a little bit of a spleen thing where all of a sudden it's like somebody just dropped like an idea or like a vision or like a action into your head. It didn't really come necessarily from like my body. It's not like I could connect that back to something I really like or just, but it's just like, oh, wait, I should do that. Or like, oh, wait, this should be this way. Like it's like just kind of comes out of nowhere,
Yeah, like
you
an
know?
intuitive hit.
Yes, yes. And so that's fascinating. And yeah, I could definitely see how for somebody who has that authority, you probably have to create a lot of quiet in your body and mind. Like you being really disciplined about like making sure that you have space to like receive and acknowledge and like act on those things would be even more important.
Yes, yes, yes. And then yeah, then those are the three most common authorities, and then there are other ones that are rare, that people can still have. And so one is, for example, the red triangle, the will center. That one has to do with um, willpower, resources, self worth, and so some people who, if they have that as their authority, it's like it's kind of sort of interesting, but they're really meant to make selfish decisions. Like, so they really are meant to be doing decisions based on what they want and not what other people want. And which is, that sounds terrible, but
That's
it's
so
it's the
fascinating. If
real,
anybody who's a listener has this authority, please DM me. I want to know about your life experience. And by the way, if you look up your human design anyway, any place it tells you what your authority is, like in the like
yeah,
little like table that has all of the summary of your stuff, it'll tell you what your stuff is. So you don't have to worry about like determining from the centers. Most places will like spit it out for you. But that's fascinating. Okay, so that center, and it would be what would it be labeled as? As the will authority?
it might be, so that center has different names. Some people call it the ego center, the will center, even the heart center. So it might be ego, usually it's like ego authority, it might
Okay.
be ego, yeah. And so so I will say one thing, just generally, if we are following our, strategy and authority, then the decision that we come to is the correct decision for everybody involved, because the universe is efficient. So that's something, I gave a reading for somebody who had that will center authority, or that ego authority, and it can sound weird to be like, just make the selfish decision, but at the same time, that's actually the correct decision for everybody involved. And I think it
Mm.
helps people when they hear that.
Whoa, that's big. And I love that you said that because I just believe that to be true in general. Like when you honor what is best for you, you're honoring what's best for everybody else, even if you can't really understand or see how it is for other people. Like it just feels like a truth to me that that's the case. And I love that we're looking at that through the lens of how can I know what's best for me? Like what might my process look like to find what's best for me, to find my own conviction about my decisions and like this language for the human design being like a way that you can look at that. Oh my God, that's fascinating. Okay, what were the other, you said there were a couple other like
There are other ones
unique
that
authorities.
are yes, where it's this can happen a lot with projectors, where they have a lot of openness in sort of the bottom shapes and centers, and then they'll have something, it's like mental authority, mental projected authority, or environmental authority. And basically they're meant to talk things out with people, not to get other people's input, but just to hear themselves, like as a, like to have others as a sounding board. And then also, a lot of times being in the right environment with the right people can also help them, with decisions. But it's still their decision. It's just sometimes it helps them have people as a sounding board, basically.
I totally get that. I've had so many moments where like it's not till I said something out loud that I said it a certain way that was different than how I was thinking it. And then I say it and I'm like, oh, right? Or just like hearing it come out of your own mouth, you're like, ah, I get it. Like there's just something about when it has to come out of the voice box,
Yeah.
that makes that difference. So that makes total sense to me that for some people that might be that where they find their magic.
Yeah. And the last one is the reflectors. Their authority is really waiting the 28 days, the moon cycle, they're lunar beings, right? And
Mm,
also, like generally, if they're feeling good, then especially if they're being in the right environment with the right people is really important to them as well. They have so much openness, and wherever we have openness, we are taking in energy from other people. So if you're in the right environment with the right people, then that's really good energy, and you're going to feel good. And this is especially true for the reflectors. And so it's the lunar cycle, but then also just feeling good is their authority, which is it's a little bit different, but yeah.
wow. Oh my God, that's fascinating. Okay, cool. So we learned a little bit about how like the energy centers can indicate like maybe what kind of activities we can be mindful of what's filling the bucket versus draining it so we can have a little bit more of like a sustainable, something that we're engaging in. We learned about, so this is the authority types. Is that also is like the strategy and authority, like is that one and the same?
The strategy goes with the type.
Gotcha.
So I know we didn't go. So okay, we talked about the generators, manifesting generators. They're waiting to respond. Some people say that manifesting generators wait to respond, but then also are meant to inform others of the people who will be impacted by their decisions. That's a debate in the human design world where some people say yes to that, some people say no. I think experiment with it and see what works, right?
Yep.
Um, the projectors are meant to wait to be recognized and to receive an invitation for opportunities. And so that it's not quite like the generators or manifesting generators where we can respond to any sign. It has to be a little bit more particular, like they're really being recognized for their skills or for what
Yeah.
they're bringing to the table, but then also being invited into something. And
Yep.
so that's their strategy. And then the manifestors, they initiate, they have this kind of internal creative flow that gives them that impetus where they're like, okay, I'm going to start this thing. And they're also meant to inform those who will be impacted by their decisions.
Hmm.
And then the reflectors, they're um, they're a little bit different now, I think. But I mean, they're like I said, they're I'm trying to think. I think it's mostly going back to their lunar authority. Yeah. But when things are going well for them, then they feel like surprise and delight. Otherwise, they'll feel disappointment. So that's the other
Mm,
thing, actually. Each of the types has a kind of emotional theme where if they're in alignment, then they're like the generators and manifesting generators will feel satisfied. If they're out of alignment, they'll feel frustration. Manifesting generators may also feel anger that comes from the manifesting side. The manifestors feel peace when they're in alignment. They'll feel anger if they're not. Um, the projectors will feel success when they're in alignment, which sounds kind of strange, but it's really that being recognized and valued um, and invited into situations, or they will feel bitterness if they feel like they're not being seen or recognized. Yeah.
mm.
And then like I said, the reflectors will feel disappointed, surprised and delighted, or disappointed. So those are kind of helpful too, because as you're going through experiences, you're like, how am I feeling about this? If I'm feeling a lot of frustration, then especially for a generator, it's like, it's a good thing to think, is this really what I want to be doing? Now, sometimes with generators, there can be a stair-step learning curve where there might be some frustration because you're waiting to break through to the next. You're like on a plateau and you're waiting to break through to the next level.
Mm.
So but if there's like a lot of frustration, then it's usually a sign that something's out of alignment.
Yeah, for this I can relate just from like my own thing. Like when I was going through the process of deciding if I wanted to stay at my corporate job a little longer or if it was time to transition into doing my business full time, like a big signal for me was that there was like consistent situations that made me feel really frustrated. Like it was one thing if like something frustrated me every here and there, like, such is life, right? But like me feeling like consistently like, oh, come on now, like for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And it started to feel like it was kind of like over it all as opposed to over just like little moments of it. That was definitely like without even knowing about human design or having that language, that was definitely a sign to me that it was time. It was time for something to change. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think all of these things are helpful. If that's all you that you know, that's still helpful to know when you're considering a certain decision, is you'll have some sort of guideposts, right?
Yeah.
Like, how am I feeling about this? And what is my authority telling me about this? Or whether it's like the spleen, like my intuitive hits, or,
Yeah.
if I have to like talk to people about it, how am I coming to any like realizations by doing that? It's just I think they're very practical tools that you can experiment with and see if they help you if you're really stuck and don't know what to do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me because I feel like sometimes starting with something like one thing, you know, can be
Yeah.
helpful because it can feel a little overwhelming with big decisions like, do I take this promotion? Do I look for another job? Do I even like my job? Like, what would another career be? Like I feel burnt out. How do I not get like to just focus on like one thing at a time? Like for a manifesting generator or generator, like where do I feel genuinely satisfied?
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
for some of the other ones, like, where do I feel like really acknowledged and appreciated in a sense of success?
Yes.
Where do I feel peace? Right? Like, just like asking yourself that one question based on your energy type to start like differentiating and like figuring out what's going on and like what specific things are making me feel the opposite of that, like that could be like a really practical way of like figuring out what's working and where you're in your lane, where you're in your flow, and where you're kind of stepping outside of that and feeling a little wonky because of it.
Yes, yes, just like with keeping that journal about our emotions, keeping track of that can be a way that you start to play with your human design, maybe a journal, and you can start using it with smaller decisions, and to see how that plays out. And then kind of as you get more used to it, to how it's working for you, then you can use it for the bigger decisions.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Okay, I think that we were also going to talk a little bit about the centers and like looking at that and how that can be connected, of course, to not only our experience in the world, but how we also might apply that knowledge to fun career stuff.
Yes, absolutely. The centers are fascinating, so fascinating, because this is where we really see how we impact other people with our energy without us even doing anything, and where they impact us, where we take in their energy. And it can, if you get more into human design and you start looking at the charts of your loved ones, you'll start seeing that they might have parts of their design that define that you don't, and then vice versa. And there's this electromagnetic connection, and it's really interesting when you start seeing those patterns.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Well, whatever else you want to share about that, I'll give the floor to you.
Yeah, I will say, I think it's really important for people to know we all have the entire chart. So it's not that we're missing anything, it's just that wherever things are colored in is where we have consistent access to that energy. Wherever we have things that are white, so undefined or open, is where we are taking and receiving the energy from other people. And so we're having many different experiences of that energy because we're experiencing it from the perspective of all these different people, and that's where we gain a lot of wisdom and where there are some life lessons. And but at the same time, it's where we grow, right?
That's
And not to
interesting.
say that, I mean, so in the defined centers, there can also be lessons as well. There can also be conditioning there. But a lot of times in the open or undefined centers is where, because we're receiving that energy from other people, is where there can be more conditioning around that, and we can talk about that as we go through. But it's really fascinating. And there are all kinds of, some charts will have like complete openness, like the reflectors. Some charts will have just a few centers that are defined. Some have all the centers defined. I mean, it totally runs the gamut, and it's all perfect, right? It's all perfect,
Oh my
whichever
gosh.
your design is, your design.
Well, and even how you describe that, like what that feels like to me is that we're meant to have different experiences with what these centers represent, right? So like having something defined, like there's some like propelling force connected to that whatever that center represents, right? Like you have like energy that's coming up there that like feels maybe a little bit more specific, and that's like in this lifetime you're meant to have that kind of experience with what that represents. But like in another place in your design you might have something that's open, and part of your experience that you're meant to have in this life that's going to contribute to your overall growth and well-being is for you to be more receptive and contemplative and to like be moved and like receive things from other people. Like that's meant to be part of your experience with that thing. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
So take okay, before we go, if anybody's watching on video, I'm just going to show what mine looks like. So like we know what we're talking about if you don't have yours up. So this is what the chart looks like. I'm showing my phone. Um, these shapes at the top that are like legitimately white and the bottom, that's what we're talking about when we say an open or undefined center. And then on my chart, you can see all of these shapes kind of like in the middle that have different colors in them. And that's what we're talking about when we say the centers are defined. Um, where do you want to start, Marla? Do you want to start like at the top and go down?
Yeah, I
Or
like that. That's the way I always do it because it's
okay, so I'll point to them before we go to them. So the top one here, um, we'll start with that center. What is this center called? Tell us about it.
yes. So this is the head center, and it's the center for ideas and inspiration. And most people have this open, actually. And so that means that those of us who have it open, we are receiving all this inspiration, all these ideas from others. The interesting thing about having it open is we also get other people's questions. We don't realize that. And so sometimes we think we have to answer a particular question, and it's not really our question to answer, or we receive an idea and we think we have to act on it. It's not always our idea to act on. And so the people who have it defined are the ones who are broadcasting all these like inspiration and ideas and things to everybody else. And so yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Okay, so like unknowingly, somebody with a defined head center, like you've got so many cool ideas and things going on that you're naturally like filling up the space with this inspiration and idea energy. And somebody with a head center undefined, you might not even realize that you're very perceptive to sort of like that sort of mental field of like what people are putting out there. And that's something good to be mindful of because you might feel like you have that impulse to do things that like aren't your thing. So like maybe a little bit of mindfulness about that is good for.
Yeah, and it is a pressure center. The head center is a pressure center. So that's why there can be that pressure, especially for people who don't have it defined, to come up with answers or to do something with the ideas in their head, right? So it is
Gotcha.
helpful to know that
Okay,
sometimes
cool.
it's not meant you're not meant to do anything with it. So
You just notice it.
yeah.
You just got to see it float by. Cool. Love it. Okay. Next one down, the little triangle that's like the opposite direction of it. What is this center? Tell us about it.
So this is the ajna, and this is a center for like processing information, coming up with our beliefs with certainty. And so people who have it defined usually have a fixed way of thinking, so it's a little bit harder for them to change their minds, but at the same time, they have certainty about what they're thinking. And that doesn't mean they're right, but they have about it. And they have a consistent way of processing the information, right? And so people who have it undefined, they don't have a consistent way of processing the information. They can see multiple perspectives, right? And sometimes they struggle for certainty. Like they want certainty, but they're not really, meant to have. So, so that's something that is helpful for people to know as well.
Oh my God, as somebody who has that undefined, I feel like a strength of that is definitely I could look at one idea a million different ways. It's almost
Yeah.
like if an idea is in the center, like I can stand here, I can stand over here and look at it, I could stand over from all the different directions and look at it, think about it, process it. But I definitely find myself like being like, I just want to feel like that's 100% it, you know? Um, that's not always how that works in my brain. So that's fascinating.
Yes. Yeah. It's really it's good to know that.
Okay, so the next one down is like a square shape underneath the two of those. Tell us about the center.
Okay, so this is the throat center, and it's the center for communication and manifestation for action. So if you were to think of human design as a game, then the way to win it would be to have, okay, I guess if you were to show if you show it again, there are these four shapes at the bottom. So the two red ones, like the will center, the sacral center, the emotional solar plexus, in the other direction.
Okay, so here,
No, the other one.
here.
Yeah, that's the emotional solar plexus. And the one at the very bottom, the root center,
Hmm.
those are motors. And if you have one
Gotcha.
of those connected up to the throat center, then that is how you win in a human mind, because that gives you the energy to actually communicate and make things happen in the world, right? And you don't
Mm.
really need other people for that. Whereas the rest of us who
Gotcha.
don't have that, we actually need to collaborate with others who can help us have that, get
Bring
to,
it to life. So
yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. Like if it's the motor, the fuel, like how you can literally have a channel to get your fuel up to the idea and the vision that you have so that there's fuel to like make it happen.
Yes. Yeah. So the manifestors have that. And then also manifesting generators will have that. Although the manifesting generators are still supposed to respond, right? First
Yeah.
and then initiate. But the manifestors, that is what makes, and they're only 9% of the population, but they're the ones who can actually initiate, right? And
Gotcha. So they're like a closed circuit in themselves. Like idea comes, they make it happen. Realized idea comes, like it all happens within themselves. To a certain extent, that happens for manifesting generators too, but it does take a little bit of collaboration because they're also waiting to respond to some outside stuff. And
yeah,
then people who don't have those motor
yes,
centers defined or don't have them connected up to the
right.
throat, they'll still feel their motor, but like getting it to the place of actually manifesting like their desires or manifesting their will takes like collaboration and teamwork with other people as a
Yes.
part of
Yes.
their process. Is that kind of like what you're saying?
Yes, yes. And so people who have the throat center undefined, for example, they sometimes struggle for recognition or to be seen, right? They do need that collaboration. They need other people to help them in that sense. And so the other interesting thing about people who have it undefined is they're actually supposed to be very good at picking up foreign languages because of that variability. They're able to bring in, since they're receiving all this energy in their throat center from other people, they're also very good at like mimicking at, other what the way that other people speak. So it's kind of interesting. Like there are,
Whoa.
beautiful things about both, like having something defined and undefined. Um, so I find that really interesting.
Okay. And then people with it defined, like what will you state again what some of their strengths and like affinities are?
Yeah, it's kind of sort of interesting because some people have it defined but not connected to a motor.
Gotcha.
So for example, I have mine defined, and so that means I have a consistent way of expressing myself and communicating, but at the same time, I do need collaboration with other people to like make things happen. And
Mhm.
so that's a nuance there. You can have it defined, but if it's not connected to one of the motors, then you still have to, it's a little bit more like a projector where you're waiting for people to recognize you and to invite you to speak about something. So the
Mhm.
way that you invited me to be onto your podcast, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I love that. Okay, which one do you want to do next? Do you want to go down or do you want to start going in like a clockwise motion?
We can go directly down to the
Okay,
diamond. So the G, it's called the G center or the identity center.
cool.
And this is the center for love, self, and direction. And so for those of us who have it defined, then we have a sense of ourselves. Like it doesn't matter who we're with or where we are, like we know ourselves. For people who don't have it defined, it's going to be their identity is going to be very, there's a lot of variability to it depending on who they're with and where they are. And it's actually very important for them to be in the right environment with the right people. And there can be for people who have it undefined, the question maybe, am I lovable? Because this is, and do I feel that I'm loved? Whereas for people who have it defined, the question is, can I be loved for who I am?
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, I feel like I need to sit with that for a minute. So undefined, or I'll start with the defined. Defined, can I be loved for who I am?
Yeah.
And
Can I be
undefined,
loved?
am
Can I
I
be
loved?
accepted for who I am? And then people who have it undefined, there's sometimes this question of, am I lovable? You know,
Wow.
yeah, I
Wow.
know.
So
It's
like, and the undefined, like that would be such an interesting experience in the world because I feel like getting to experience your own identity kind of like through the lens of your experiencing your environment, like that could be very interesting and that you can see all these different facets and parts of yourself depending on your situation.
yeah.
But I could also see how like maybe it might feel like you don't have like an anchor holding down the boat. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Like,
yes, yes. that is I have it defined, but yes, that's my understanding that when you have it undefined, it can feel that way, that um, it's there's a lot of wisdom to be gained over your lifetime, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's fascinating. And like I wonder how does that translate to career stuff specifically when that center might be like defined or undefined?
Yeah, I mean, when it's defined and you know who you are, then probably probably that's an advantage in the sense of you'll know, okay, this is really not suiting me because I know myself and I know that this is just not what I want to be doing. But
Yeah.
if it's undefined, then maybe it really depends there on the people that you're around and on the like your actual environment. Does it feel good to you? Do you feel like, you know, does it, because that's where you'll get the most opportunities if you're in the right environment with the right people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it might not be such like a black and white, this is me or this is not me, but it's more
Right.
like what is my experience with myself when I'm in this place and do I like that experience of myself?
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting to think about. I mean, what if you start at a job and it feels really good to you, great environment, great coworkers, and over time those people leave and other people come in that you're not really clicking with anymore. It doesn't feel like I would think that would really impact your how you feel about yourself and then obviously how you feel about the work as well. Like
Yeah.
you're probably more susceptible to that.
Mm, fascinating. Okay, I love that. Do we want to do like the little triangle that's kind of right next to the
Yeah,
diamond?
yeah, we'll do that
Okay.
one. So that's the one that has different names, the will center, ego center, heart center, it just depends. I like
Okay.
will center because I associate it with willpower. So it's
Yeah.
just willpower for resources, for self-worth, for the material plane, basically.
Mm,
And so when you have it defined, you have consistent access to your willpower, which is amazing because it's not a lot of people do. This is one of those, it's not defined for most people, which is interesting because our society tells us that we have to have willpower and we have to, if we say we're going to do something, we have to do it. And then for people who don't have it defined, it's very hard for them to do that. And so then they blame themselves and feel bad about themselves, right?
mm,
So the people who have it defined are able to make a commitment and say, yes, I'm going to do this, and they can go through with it. Having said that, though, it is a motor that can also get burnt out, right? So there needs to be time for rest. And it's really
mm,
important. What I really like about the will center is when you really understand that our worth does not come, our value does not come from just productivity. It's we are inherently valuable and worthy. Then we understand that we deserve to have rest, that it's something that we need. And then, then we're not overtaxing our willpower, right?
mm,
And so that's something that I don't have it defined. And the other thing is when you don't have it defined, you feel like you have to prove yourself. And I
mm.
have really felt that so much throughout my life. Like, and when I read this, I was like, oh my God, this is one of the biggest revelations for myself in human design. Was like, I'm not here to prove myself. People who have it undefined are not here to prove themselves. We're here to be wise about value. That's, we have lessons around that. What is valuable? What is, um, we're not meant to be over committing to things, and so they actually say don't make promises, because you just don't know. You may not have like the willpower. I mean, having said that, if you are going into a decision with your strategy and authority, then that's the right decision. You will have the energy you need for it.
Yeah.
Um, but if you're only trying to depend on willpower and you don't have consistent access to that, it's going to be really hard.
Mm. Wow, that is fascinating because you don't have it defined, but I have mine defined. And when I got the reading, they said that that was something that was kind of unique about my chart. I think they called it the heart center, that like,
Yeah.
and it's connected to the triangle on the side that's on like clock, like if we're going clockwise, like it's like around like 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock, kind of like on the, so on that side,
Oh,
which
yes.
center is that?
The emotional solar plexus. Yes.
Okay, so I have that connected. They said there's something significant about that being connected to like the solar plexus too, right? And so it's interesting hearing you talk about that because I definitely have times in my life where I've decided it's going to happen, it's going to happen, and like that's it. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts. It's happening, right? And that feels like a little bit like my earth sign energy, like when
Yes.
it's happening, you know?
It's funny you say that because I would totally associate the will center with the earth signs. Totally.
Mhm.
It is
Yeah.
very much about the material plane and um
like
So for
the
example,
stability and the commitment and like the like almost like pig-headedness of like when I say it's gonna be, you know?
yes, yes. Yeah, and in your presence, because you're broadcasting that all the time. So for example, your clients will feel very empowered with you when they are in your presence. Yes.
What?
Yes.
Oh my gosh,
That's
that's
what
so
that's
cool.
what you're broadcasting to them. I would just say that when they're not in your presence, if, for example, if you give them homework,
Uh-huh.
they seem very gung ho about it when they're with you, but then maybe it's harder for them to go, actually complete it maybe on their own because they're no longer with you. Yeah, because, and they don't, let's say they don't have a defined will center, then they don't have that consistent access to the willpower.
So
So
interesting, but they can get like a little hit of that like heart willpower energy
absolutely.
because like where we are defined, we're broadcasting is essentially what you're saying. It feels
Yes,
like if it's like a yin yang thing, like when it's defined, you're a little bit more of the yang energy, like you're a little bit more of like the
yes,
giving.
yes,
Whereas when it's open and it's undefined, you're yin, you're like a little bit more receptive in it.
yes, yeah.
Oh
So
my
that's
gosh, that's
yeah,
fascinating.
I know. I think that's fascinating too.
Oh
So
my gosh, that's so cool. Okay, so that's that. Oh my gosh, this is like making my brain go to many different places because I'm sure if we looked at like even in a company's hierarchy, like
mm,
the people who have a certain center defined and like what roles they gravitate towards, right? Like I'm sure probably a lot of leaders like in leadership positions, like pe the people who do have this will center defined probably like naturally end up gravitating towards that because that like energy of like we're gonna do it. We can see this through. Like we're gonna
yeah,
make this happen. Like broadcasting that kind of energy to most people who don't have that defined, like
yeah,
how that would be like very motivating for people.
yes, absolutely. Yes.
Oh my gosh, this is like blowing my mind. That is so freaking cool. Is there anything else that you would want to share about that center as it applies either to like personal experience or work stuff?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think is interesting is, again, when we talk about conditioning, sometimes what can happen with the will center when it's defined is maybe, uh, you know, it can happen that if you're when you're a kid that people might be like, oh, you're too much, you're just too much, you need, especially if you're talking a lot about yourself, because that's the will center, right? Then sometimes people will make themselves smaller, so even though they have this beautiful energy, this consistent access to their willpower, because they've been conditioned to somehow see it as bad, then they're not making the best use of it. So this is one area where, I believe in traditional human design, they say that conditioning only happens in the open centers, but I've seen that it can happen in defined centers as well. It's just the
Yeah.
way we grow up, the way that what society tells us. And so sometimes even if you have something defined, like for it to really be at its best, you have to make sure that you're not bringing in any of those like limiting beliefs or that making yourself smaller because of experiences that you had in the past.
100%. And I definitely relate. And what I feel like you're referring to, and just for anybody listening, and of course, correct me, Marla, if I have this wrong, there's a whole part of human design that talks about conditioning. So
Mhm.
based on your design, what you most likely received from your environment in childhood and how that created beliefs about yourself and the world and like it's a whole part of the human design to look at the conditioning and kind of to like deconstruct that. Does that work? Is that true? Does that really support you being able to tap into your best energy? Like there's like content that's specific to your design about what that looks like for each individual person. And I agree with you, like of course open centers being more receptive, like they might find it might happen a little bit, I guess, like easier that like things would get superimposed onto them because they're so open. But if you have that center defining, you're projecting a certain energy, like of course it would like that energy is probably going to trigger something in people that they put back on you. And
Yes,
you learn that what you put out gets a certain kind of response that might inform you to put something different out or like to be different
yes,
about the way you put something out. So that would make perfect sense to me that both get different kinds of conditioning.
yes, yes. That's a beautiful way of putting it. Absolutely. Because you're right. What we're broadcasting, people are reacting to that. And it's not
Yeah.
always going to be a positive reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay, that's really cool. I love that. Okay, which one do you want to do next? Do you want to do that like sacral emotional if we're moving kind
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
clockwise?
Yes, let's go to the sacral center, the square kind of in the middle. The
Oh, the
center
sacral center in the middle. Okay, so we're going straight down the middle, the
for,
square underneath the diamond.
yes,
Not the very bottom one, but the one right above the bottom one. Okay.
yes. So that's the center for life force, workforce energy. This is what makes
One of the motors.
yeah, the generators and manifesting generators, that's what makes that type, And so when it's defined, these are the doers and they have the sustainable energy, you know. Having said that, if they're doing things they really don't like, they can do it, they can keep doing it, but then they're going to get burnt out at some point, right? It does burn.
Frustrated. Cue
Uh,
frustration or anger.
but if they're lit up by what they're doing, they have endless energy, right? Which I'm
Yeah.
sure that you have had that experience.
I've had both types. Yes, I've had the type where I could literally do it for eons and eons, and then the types where I'm like, okay, I can't, like, I can drum up the energy if I need to, but like, I'm not happy about it, you know? I've
Yeah.
had both experiences.
Well, and especially with your defined will center, that's like a backup, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so and yes. What was I saying? Oh, but those types who don't have it defined, they can borrow the energy. Actually, so let me say this. When you are receiving the energy, you're also, so if you have an open center or defined, undefined center, you're receiving the energy from others and then you're also amplifying it, right?
Hmm.
And so that can make it seem like so the types that don't have it defined, it can make it seem in the short run like they have just tremendous energy because they are actually amplifying the sacral energy of others around them,
Hmm.
but it's not sustainable. They're borrowing that energy, and so for them it's really important for them to know when enough is enough, right? Because they can easily think that that is their energy and they can keep using it, and the reality is that they actually need more rest. Their energy works in a different way.
So it's kind of like ride the wave of that moment, be in the moment, tap into that. But like if it looks different when you walk away, like that's okay. Like it's not meant to look the same as when you're bouncing off with people, and that's good.
Yeah, and they can, if those other types that don't have it defined, if they push themselves too much, then they will also experience burnout. And so it's just good for them to know they do need that rest. It's how they're designed. They need more rest. That doesn't mean that it's just they work in a different way.
Mm.
It's basic.
Honor your stuff, people. You know, like
Yeah.
when you just know that like your style is a little different. Like if there's a part of you that makes you feel a little ashamed about that, process that part, acknowledge, work through that part, release that so you can just be you without all of the extra little gunk around it, you know? So I
Yeah.
love that.
Yes.
And then defined people, they got energy like when they're excited. And it's funny that it's called sacral too, because even with your sacral chakra, that's very much around joy and pleasure and feelings and emotions. So that's
Yes.
interesting that there's this correlation between if you feel joyful, if you feel pleasurable, it's like a never-ending fire that like never runs out of wood. You know what I mean? Or like a waterfall, a well that like never runs out of water. If you're tapped into the feelings of joy and pleasure, it sounds like.
Yes. Absolutely.
Oh
That's
my
right.
God, that's so cool.
I know. So when you think, or when I think about it, it's like, okay, 70% of the population have that defined. Imagine if all that 70%, if they were all doing things they really loved, like what would the world look like? Right?
Oh, wow. And that also makes me think too, for the 30% that doesn't, like you have a really important role to play too. Like you're meant to be in places that like probably feel good when you're tapping in with people and to like you have an important role, I'm sure, in your partnership with people who do have it defined, but it's just going to be a different kind of role.
Yeah, and I mean that would feel good to them too, because if you think about they're taking in all of that, and then so the manifestor, yes, everyone has a role to play. The manifestors are here to get the ball rolling.
Hmm.
They get that incredible inspiration,
Inspiration.
and
Hmm.
they act, and they're making this big impact, and then they move on because they're meant to keep doing that. And then other people are meant, like the generators or manifesting generators, are come in and they like, okay, we're going to keep doing this. This is awesome. We're going to keep working on this, and then the projectors are also here to be the guides and to advise, and it's like all the roles, and then the reflectors are supposed to reflect that our community in general. It's like all beautiful. Everybody
Yeah.
has a role in this.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Okay, cool. I think we have three more centers left.
Yes.
Do we want to go straight down and do the root and then do the ones on the side, or what are you feeling?
I guess we can go to the emotional solar plexus, so the one off to the right.
Okay,
The,
so if you're looking at your chart
yeah.
directly to the right, the triangle, um, directly to the right. Okay.
So the center, this is the center for emotions. And so we were talking about this earlier, but those of us who have it defined, we're going to have this emotional wave. Like we are just going to be experiencing our emotions, and other people who don't have it defined, they're going to be taking in our emotions. And so what happens there is sometimes people who don't have it defined or who have it open, if it's too much for them, then they're going to avoid emotional conflicts because they don't want that experience, right? Because they're like amplifying all of the emotions.
Mhm.
So one tip for them, like for somebody who has an undefined, if they are in a situation that's very emotionally charged with somebody, let's say who has it defined, if they step out of that energy field for like 15 minutes and kind of release, empty out all of that, then that can really help them with the situation. And also sort of thinking of themselves more as a screen where the emotions just pass through rather than like a sponge that's taking that in and like holding on to all of that, right?
Oh, what a beautiful visual. You're a screen that it passes through, like wind passing
Yes,
through a screen.
yes,
Flows right out. You kind of sense it as it's coming through, but it goes, oh, wow. Wow, wow, wow. I feel like for all of my sensitive babes out there, all of you people that identify as being like very plugged into the emotional current of a room, whether I feel like that's for people that are either have that defined or not, but like a lot of people might identify, like think of that imagery, like when you're in places that feel charged. It's like wind through a screen. Wow. I love that, Marla.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
I really love that too, and I think it can be really helpful. Um, and and yeah, that's, but to like, I have this defined, and so I still sometimes don't want to deal with conflict either. This is what I mean. Like we have conditioning everywhere, even if it's
Yeah.
defined, undefined.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah,
that's
I feel like for I wonder too for like the difference in experience. Like for me as somebody who has it defined, like my emotions are my teachers for sure. And when I started looking at my emotions as like offering me information, right? And trying to support me, that really changed the game because then instead of immediately getting overwhelmed or trying to repress them or like kind of like taking them to mean something that didn't feel like it was so helpful, I just got to be curious and kind of observe what happened as the emotion was like having its course, running its course, aka like the crest of the wave, right?
yes,
Like I could be in at the peak and know that it was gonna end. I know how to regulate my body and create safety, like it's gonna be okay, you know? And it crests. And then after that, I kind of get to look back and be like, okay, like what was in all of that? How do I feel now that it's like fully had its cycle? What has it taught me about myself? What have I released? What have I, like kind of had that like relationship with it?
yeah,
And that's been really helpful. And I wonder with people who have an empty center, if they get to have that process, but like based on what they observed from other people. Like, what did it teach me to be around so and so who was just really angry about something? Or what did it teach me about how I feel about something to be around somebody who just felt really jazzed or felt really sad or like had their emotional wave? Like, what did that teach me about like my own self and how I feel about things to like get to observe or be the screen that their emotions pass through?
yes, absolutely. That's what these open centers are about, is having all these experiences because you're taking in the energy of that center from so many different people.
Whoa. Whoa. Okay, that's so cool. Our last two centers, which ones are we going to?
Yes, I guess we'll go to the spleen. So we'll go to the other side.
Okay, the
So
triangle on the opposite side
right,
from that one on the
opposite.
left, if you're looking down at your chart.
So the spleen is the center for intuition, fear, well-being, health, the immune system. So people who have it defined, they have consistent access to their intuition, and they have a sense of what's good for their bodies as well, for the immune system. It's kind of a feel-good energy. And so the people who have it undefined, they don't have consistent access to their intuition. They have the potential to have tremendous intuition because they are taking in that energy from so many different people. But one thing about having undefined is sometimes sometimes people who have it undefined will hold on to things for longer than they need to, because that gives them a sense of safety. So it can be actual things, or it can be like relationships, or, like if you have it,
Like an external thing that
right, an
creates a
external.
sense of safety because maybe like that feels a little bit harder to access just simply
Yeah,
within themselves. Gotcha.
yes. And then the last one is the root, which is the center for adrenaline, motivation, and drive. And so people who have it defined, have consistent access to that. Having said that, actually, the root has this pulse, like sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off. It's a little bit about timing.
Mhm.
So people who have it defined are generally able to, you know, tolerate that pressure. It is a pressure center, like the head center. And when it's undefined, people feel pressure to do things just to free themselves of the pressure of doing those things. And so I noticed that you have it undefined.
I do have it undefined, so that is ringing very true.
Yes. And so and because it's undefined, then you're going to experience that energy from other people who have it defined, right? The adrenaline.
And tell me more about the like experience of it being defined. I'm so curious.
Yeah, I mean, supposedly we have consistent access to that adrenaline, to the drive. But it's kind of interesting because it's not always on. So sometimes, like let's say the sacral center is like, yes, this is good, but something doesn't, it's like the timing doesn't feel quite right yet, and so I have experienced that, yes, for sure. But it's, in theory, you would think that people who have it defined would do better with stress. I mean, I think stress is hard for all of us, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so I don't know about that, but I think for people who don't have it defined, there is more pressure to actually get things done.
It's so interesting because again, I'm thinking of it in like correspondence with the chakras. And so like the root chakra being a place where we feel safe and we feel grounded and like we feel kind of like a sense of almost like enoughness or belonging, like I'm here, I'm good, you
Yes,
know? And like how that might correlate with some of the energy that you've just talked about. And I feel like maybe even like what motivates us to do things, you know?
yes, yeah.
That's so interesting. And do you have yours defined on your chart?
I do. Yes, mine is defined. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, I still feel stressed by things. So, it's not like just because I have it defined that somehow it does, I don't feel that pressure to also get things done. But supposedly it's a little bit more manageable, right? Uh,
Mm.
with some centers, I feel like the difference between the defined and undefined can be starker in some ways. So,
Mhm. Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. All right. So give me as we like wrap up this conversation, I'd love for you to give the listener some examples of like the ways that you're working with clients or like what parts of their career stuff that you're helping them work through with this kind of information.
yeah. Well, I'm working with some people who are, between jobs, and so that's a really perfect opportunity for them to figure out what do they want in the next job, right? And so bringing in the human design and so for example, with one woman, she's a generator, and so she had this spreadsheet of all these jobs that she was applying to, and after I explained, how a generator works ideally, she decided to add a column where to this spreadsheet where it would be like yes or no, like does this light me up or not, like this job description, give me, like, am I really drawn to it for some reason. And it was just a way for her to look at it in a different light,
Yeah.
right? And to really focus on, and then also, for what she has been doing while she's in between jobs, it's it's really helpful for her to know, like, oh, I should really be following the things that are lighting me up. So for
Mm,
example, she's very interested, she's in the tech sector, she's very interested in AI, so she's been taking courses that she's really drawn to, right?
mm,
And so then with another client, she is also in between jobs. And so and she's a manifester. And so, helping her understand, kind of look back on some of her past positions and what she enjoyed, she realized that, yes, she really does enjoy like the initiating, starting something, and not being in the weeds of things. So that helps her like figure out kind of what to look for in the next job, right? So,
Yeah.
so these sorts of things are really are just very helpful at a basic level. And
Yeah.
then working with somebody else who's a projector, and so you know, bringing in the fact that, and she has already mentioned that in past jobs she really enjoyed teaching, right? And so that's something that projectors are very good at, because that's part of advising and guiding others, and
Yeah.
just sort of validating that, yes, like this is, you're designed to be doing something like that, and then also having her experiment with what does it look like, um, to wait, to be recognized, to be invited into things, and instead of just trying to make things happen, right?
Yeah.
So that's how some practical ways of using this information in
I
for
love that. And I'm sure too, as you like get like work more closely with people and you look at the gates and all this kind of stuff, you can like pull out
yeah,
even more little specifics. Like I'm even thinking I used to work in staffing, so like helping people like in the hiring process or whatever, like what you highlight on a resume, like what tasks in your past job that you want to get hired for in your next job, right? Like what types of things that you would put right at the top based on what your strengths are or what you enjoy or what you naturally emit. I think that's so fascinating way to look at the different centers of like what energy are you naturally emitting without even, you know, thinking about it, like to like through the lens of all of that, navigating each part and how that also helps you like attract in the jobs that are really going to be in alignment with that.
yes, absolutely.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this marvelous episode with Marla about finding career fulfillment with human design. Marla, if people are curious about following content that you're putting out there or potentially working with you, please tell us where we can find you.
Yes. So you can find me on my website. It's www.manyworldsmanypossibilities.com. And I'm also on Instagram under Marla J. Tseng. And I am on TikTok. I haven't done as much, but I am on there as well, same name. So yes, I
Okay,
would,
cool.
if you just want to reach out to me, my email is marla@manyworldsmanypossibilities.com. So yeah, I'd be happy to
Fabulous.
talk to you.
Yes, we'll put that information in the show notes so that you can easily go and find her there. I will just take this opportunity to remind everybody that if you want to work with me one-on-one, if you are wanting to have some breakthroughs like we're having on this podcast, channel in some information that's going to be really helpful to you. One of the sessions I love the most is the Akashic activation sessions, where I'm channeling your spirit teams, your Akashic record keepers, and tons of really cool information. I still do single sessions on Fridays whenever I'm available. So check out my website, healingwithbre.net, to see what sessions are available. As of right now, I have energy healing spots open. If you're a previous client or somebody who's like particularly interested in me doing a birth chart reading, you can email me about that. I do those kind of like one-off now. Oh, and last thing, since you're on your podcast app, wherever you are listening, please do me the great favor of going and liking, following the podcast, or giving it a rating. A lot of these apps don't even require you to write a review. You can just go hit 4 or 5 star ratings, whatever you feel so moved. But while you're on this app, before you go, play another one. Please give me give me a like, follow, rating. That would be so helpful. Um, but other than that, I hope you guys all have a wonderful week. Thank you again, Marla, for being here. This was so, so much fun. And I will see you guys next week.